With the able assistance of Mr. Ludo and
Mr. Aludo, okay. Mr. Bell and Mr. Ball, excuse me, and Ms. Theobald.
We received some correspondence from Rich Hall, Secretary of Planning, raising some concerns and issues, I guess you could say objections to the TierMap. And I believe, I don't have a copy of the letter in front of me. Would you happen to have it? I think he's okay, and basically he's requesting a public hearing, which by law the MDP can do. And they'd like to have a public hearing on the TierMap that you all adopted. I think we have 60 days from the receipt of his letter to establish that hearing, and then I will leave it to Liz to say what.
Ms. Theobald?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Aludo.
As you know, MDP has gone ahead and given their comments. What the Board of County Commissioners does need to do is schedule a public hearing. Although it is recommended in Mr. Hall's letter that this Board of Commissioners take some action within 60 days, it's not required by statute to go ahead and take action within the 60 days.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Theobald. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Commissioner Robinson, and then Commissioner Collins. Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Too? Okay.
Okay, just the theoretical. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but the objection was to the 9,000 acres that were added to Tier 2 from Tier 4.
Yes.
That's correct.
Hypothetically, if this body made a motion that passed to remove that, would a public hearing still be necessary because comments were made, or would that take the need for a public hearing away?
My view on the interpretation of the statute requiring the public hearing is that once MDP does make comments, if in fact they do, then in which case it is mandatory that you do take action, at least to go ahead and schedule a public hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Collins, I think.
County Attorney Theobald's answered the first question, because it was what was the authority to make the request for 60 days. But even in your response as it relates to interpreting the letter itself, I don't really know if the actual letter suggests, and that's my opinion, I will read it again, suggests that it was an either or, and I'm hoping that that's not the case, because that would really be disturbing if essentially the interpretation is if the commissioners were to decide to maintain the initial template as it was presented without the suggestion of the additional 9,000 acres, then somehow that would not trigger a public hearing. That's problematic to me. And even in terms of interpretation, I mean, I think there's so many open questions as it relates to the law and how this process is interpreted that it creates the specter of speculation in many instances. And I guess the thing that's most surprising to me, even about that proposed change in the template, and I emphasize that it was a template that the proposed change took place in. The actual interpretation of the Deferred Development District as Tier 2 was actually in the initial proposed maps that MDP sent to the county in November of 2012, making the case primarily in recognizing that it could be appropriately viewed as Tier 2. Also in the letter and recommendations, it also made comments to be cautious about it. There's no doubt about that, but in its interpretation, it viewed that as being appropriate. And so there lies the challenge from my perspective. This clearly is something where I think the county has made great strides, and I still commend the work of the work group for the things that it put in place, and they're coming up with the template that I believe gave the commissioners something that could be useful as we move forward with this. But I realize much of this is commentary, but that's the thing that struck me about the comments, that the state essentially told us when it proposed a tier map that was appropriate.
Do you have a copy of that particular?
Yes, I do.
Okay, because
He changed his mind. And is there, Mr. Aludo, is there some way that perhaps you or Mr. Ball could put this in context?
Well,
this is
my understanding was that the correspondence that I recall came to us before we actually adopted a map, and they were their preliminary comments.
Let's just hold up a second, let them finish here. Go ahead. No, that's okay, go ahead, explain.
I'll dig through this.
Okay.
My recollection was that they were giving us some advanced commentary on what they thought would have been appropriate. But this was ahead of any adoption. But nonetheless,
Yeah.
they did send us some comments.
Okay.
Steve, did you want to add anything to that?
The one thing that I could add, and I did go back and read that correspondence in November, was they made the point that whether it was Tier 2 or Tier 4 in the Deferred Development District should really be based on what the Comprehensive Plan's direction is about releasing the Deferred Development District. So they made that clear in the letter that depending on what your policy is for the timing of releasing development to be on sewer and water, it could be appropriate as Tier 2 or it could be appropriate as Tier 4. So going back to look at what the comprehensive plan says, the comprehensive plan says not to release that during, to only look at it on a 5-year incremental basis, which the Planning Commission did and recommended not to release development at this time.
And what the rationale for not releasing is because we have adequate land mass available?
Yes, we have adequate. We had a land use supply and demand study done, and it indicated there was adequate supply to meet demands.
Can I, Mr. Ball, by releasing this, is there a concern that you're diverting development by opening it to these areas whereby we won't get the critical mass that we need perhaps in the areas that we need to obtain the kind of funding we're going to need for transportation infrastructure? Or does that play into this at all?
Well, indirectly, I think indirectly.
Hold on a second.
Yes.
Is there something, did you want to say something?
I'll ask when I'm ready.
Okay, because the laughing and so forth is distracting, if you don't mind.
What I did want to say, how the heck do you know what he was thinking?
I asked him a question.
I'm not saying what he was thinking. I'm saying what was in the letter. It was in the correspondence at the very end of the letter that he made that point exactly. That whether or not it's a Tier 2 or Tier 4 can be based on what your guidance of the comprehensive plan.
I wasn't asking what Secretary.
About traffic and future
sorry.
transportation.
I wasn't asking what Secretary Hall was thinking. I'm asking him for his professional opinion.
Okay, that's what you said.
Well, that is what I said, but go ahead, Mr. Ball.
So, is your question, could it affect the funding for transportation?
Well, when you open those areas,
Yes.
okay, how would you be able to prevent, say we know that we're only going to get so many units in a year,
Right.
for example. What could you do or would you do to prevent, for example, so say we want most of those units to be in a certain area where we're
Right.
where we're trying to get the density necessary to demonstrate that we should be eligible for funding. Are there mechanisms that you can put in place that would, once you open that up as Tier 2, and once the water, and as you move through, what prevents that from sort of splitting the numbers that you need?
Well, you really need to have a more detailed policy in place if you're going to do that. And this has been our concern, is that the policy in the comprehensive plan says we should look at the deferred development district on no less than a 5-year window,
Okay.
or with the update of the comprehensive plan. Okay, we've done that. We did it in 2006, we did it in 2013, and the policy remained. So now if we want to go back and revisit that policy, that's certainly your option to do that. From our perspective, we need to do much greater analysis before we should open up the deferred development district. Analysis related to location, timing, amount, how we're going to service and pay for sewer service in those areas. Because it's such a large area, we would only want to open it up incrementally, pieces at a time, and we could service it in a logical manner. And we haven't, our policy is not to go there to do that kind of analysis because there hasn't really been a demand for it yet at this time.
And then just one other question, and again, you were at the Planning Commission meeting when the decision was made not to open this area up.
Yes.
Can you tell me anything about what they maybe stated or said? And Ms. Theobald, were you there as well?
Yes, I was there as well.
What was some of their thinking on that, if you can recall?
I really can't recall. I'd have to refer to my notes.
We have to get the minutes. Mr. Ball, do you remember?
Well, when the Planning Commission made changes from the staff's recommendation on the comprehensive plan, we had a series of policy setting meetings.
Okay.
So that they could give us direction on what they wanted in the plan. That was one of those meetings. And I think because of my recollection is because of the supply and demand, we did the analysis for the plan. It wasn't necessary to open that up at this time.
That's what I was trying to understand. Is it really about supply and demand?
Well, that
Part
was
of
the
it.
basis, my understanding of the basis of that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Robinson?
Okay, my question is for Ms. Theobald, because I don't think it's time to even debate the land use issue, because, let's face it, a TierMap was presented and passed, so it's not a proposed TierMap anymore, it's a past TierMap. So my question for you is, we passed a TierMap that the Maryland Department of Planning is obviously unhappy with, has written their comments. What is your advice to us, based on statute, what we need to do next? You said that public hearing, but you were not sure that 60 days was required.
Not
so
as a
then
time frame,
so
but
then
a
what should we
public
do?
hearing, in fact, is required.
I'm sorry?
A public hearing is going to be required based on and I think, as you recall, I think everybody was referring to the letter of November of 2012 because it had only been proposed. I think a lot of the comment that we heard was that it was a premature letter. Now a map has been presented to the commissioners. The commissioners have already gone ahead and adopted it, so therefore the next step based on the law is that it be scheduled for a public hearing, since there has been comment from MDP.
So your advice to us is to schedule a public
Yes.
hearing? Thank you.
Okay, is there a motion to schedule a public hearing?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Robinson. Is there a second? Second. And so when we're under debate, well, is there any discussion?
Yes.
Commissioner Collins?
I haven't heard any comments from the county attorney's office as it relates to an interpretation of the letter itself, because I raise that distinction because even in Commissioner Robinson's presentation, that somehow the state has serious concerns with the map as it is at this time. I'd like, some interpretation of some of the comments. For example, a fairly detailed discussion on the county itself, and let me, if I can find this, where the county needs to essentially reevaluate how we look at growth and land use management as it relates to Tier 2, which I didn't see those comments necessarily in earlier interpretations, but it's talking about, for example, the landmass and comparing the landmass to Baltimore City and the District of Columbia. Now, listening to the comments made by Mr. Ball, I actually think everything he said was reasonable and made sense. But I mean, part of this discussion is this suggestion that somehow there's going to be this creation of this out of control immediate request for growth within that sector of the county's population area. And I don't think, first off, anybody's suggesting anything like that. I think certainly I've certainly looked at and reviewed is, the overall map and how it impacts the county's future and our future plans for growth, and trying to balance that with the views of the state, because at the end of the day, this is Maryland state law, and so it is absolutely critical that we look at this from the perspective of how the state is interpreting this. And I think the work of the work group certainly put that in consideration and put us in a position where I felt that there was some degree of consensus on the direction, but I'm only raising this issue because we're talking about approximately 9,000 acres. When you look at the amount of acreage that the county has basically allowed for preservation, and one thing, and I think it was raised during the course of the last work group presentation, because I would like to see how we compare to other jurisdictions that have moved forward with this process in terms of actual acreage and the size of our county and what we've actually proposed for preservation, because I think we've well over half of our county we've put in that position right now, and I wonder if that's consistent with other jurisdictions throughout the state. I mean, do we have any way to evaluate that up to this point? Do we know?
Well, we could certainly research that. It might,
I'd just be curious to see.
Okay.
I'd like to add one thing if we're going to quote from the letter, and I think this is kind of critical. In the letter, Secretary Hall states that the Maryland Department of Natural Resources has significant concerns that extensive development within the Mattawoman Creek watershed will irreparably harm this water body, which supports a diverse, high-quality aquatic ecosystem. So I think it's not just the 9,000 acres, but it's where the 9,000 acres are, is what seems to be even adding an exclamation point to this. And then, if I agree with you, Commissioner Collins, that nobody believes that within 5 or 10 or even 15 years that these 9,000 acres will be densely developed. But then if that's the case, then why are we even putting it in Tier 2?
Okay, all righty. And I think we've made the point. We have a motion, we have a second. This isn't the time to debate. We've long since passed that time. Is all in favor of schedule? The motion was to schedule a public hearing in accordance with the law and the record. Commissioner Collins?
We've been told by staff that, and the county attorney's office, that we have to have a public hearing. So why are we having a vote if we're being told by council that?
Well, then let's schedule it. Let's come up with a date then.
And you going to withdraw your motion?
If we can just go straight to a date, sure.
But I think that lies the question in my mind, and I'm saying that respectfully to the county attorney's office. Well,
the purpose for making the motion to proceed is really to keep our minutes tidy, correct, to show that we acted on the recommendation. So whether or not we have to act or not act, whether or not we're required by law, I would certainly have to defer to Ms. Theobald. But my sense is the motion has been made and seconded to demonstrate in our minutes that we are responding to the recommendation and also adhering to the law. Ms. Theobald, could you help me with that?
What it is that, and I spoke to staff about this before, I would have seen this and received it as an agenda, as correspondence to the commissioners, raising and triggering now the requirements of the law, which is to schedule a public hearing. I don't know that I'm not going to maintain that a motion to do so is necessary, but I think that we do need to go ahead and proceed directly to that.
Okay. Well, we have a motion and a second. We've had discussion, so let's go ahead and at least finalize this motion. Is there any further discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. The motion carries. And now was that everyone voted? Okay. Or was silent? And so, Ms. Ferguson, would you like to offer a date?
Commissioners, we just set 2 public hearings. One for sure is probably going to be short as a cleanup item. For Tuesday, May 6th, I just don't know how full you want to make that day, or if you want me to go to the next week, which would be Tuesday, May 13th.
Is that agreeable with everyone? That's, okay.
And what time would you?
Davis, well, I believe that the law gives us leniency with who holds the public hearing.
That it does. The local legislative body or the planning board can review the growth tier maps.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Ms. Eagles.
The local legislative body, that would be this Board of County Commissioners or the planning board, can entertain that.
The planning board never addressed this particular tier map. It was this.
They would have to hear. This is only the...
It's at the option of the Board of Commissioners if you wish to pass it, as it were, to the Planning Commission.
Commissioners, is that a motion, Commissioner Davis?
No, I just want discussion on it. Is the process that they would just hold a hearing?
The process would be that they would hold the hearing.
And they would make recommendations back to the Board of Commissioners. I just passed my copy of the law to Commissioner Collins.
My own personal feeling is since this particular tier map in question was never addressed by the Planning Commission, it was only addressed by the working group, which then presented it to us, and then it was passed 3-2 a couple of weeks ago, that the public hearing be held by the commissioners.
Probably makes sense that it's held by the commissioners, but I just want to make sure
Okay,
that we're
that's my
fully
rationale.
advised of the law, that we're fully advised of the law. And it doesn't matter whether they heard it or not, they would just hold a hearing.
And make the recommendations.
All right.
Okay, so then, are we in agreement that this public hearing will be before the Board of Commissioners on May 13th, Ms. Ferguson, at 6 p.m.? We haven't gotten that far yet? At 6 p.m., late enough that people who are commuters would have a chance to
I
get
would go
here?
6:30.
6:30? Is everyone okay with 6:30? Okay, 6:30 p.m. on May 13th.
But the only concern I have is that I am going to make a motion for further legal advice and consultation and some of the issues that Ruben mentioned. So I just want to make sure we have enough time.
I believe that will be sufficient time.
Could we be clear on what those legal questions are? I know you've said that, but could we summarize that? Would you mind summarizing those
Well,
questions?
I definitely want an analysis of the letter, of the concerns that were mentioned in the letter. That would make
The
sense.
things that are raised by Secretary
Yeah,
Hall.
that were raised by Secretary Hall.
Okay.
Well, a lot of it's his opinion, correct?
Yeah, it is just his
It's
opinion.
opinionated.
Anything else, Commissioner Collins, besides an analysis of the letter? No more? Okay. Ms. Holtz, did you have a question?
I was just going to read, perhaps it's helpful to focus on the further research. If I read, if the Department of Planning comments on any of the tiers or on an area within one of the tiers, the local legislative body or the planning board shall hold at least one public hearing on the comments by the Department of Planning.
And so,
Be on the comment.
right, so that's important for our advertisement. That's important for all of us to keep in mind, that the public hearing would be on the comments. So back to what Commissioner Davis is saying, whether or not it's his opinion or what have you, that's what the law requires.
I have a question.
And then that's it? What happens after that?
I have a question about the comments of whom?
The Department of Planning.
The letter.
But is his letter considered the comments of the Department of Planning?
Yes,
Yes.
he's the secretary.
I understand, I know that,
Yeah.
but
I believe that the way it is that the
he
letter...
alone makes the decision, excuse me, but he alone is the sole arbiter of whether it's appropriate or not?
It doesn't require any specific process. And there may be a rule of
That's a
procedure
good question. I mean,
that the department has adopted. we can look into that.
Would you find out whether
Sure.
there is a process, or is he the sole arbiter? I mean,
We can certainly investigate whether or not there was a process. I was
What-
merely
yeah.
relying on the
I
portion.
believe that's vague.
Okay. What else do we
Sorry
have?
about that, interrupt.
No, I just thought we have a public hearing, and then about the comments, then what happens?
If the planning board addresses the comments, what they're going to be doing is making a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners that the tiers be changed or that the adopted tiers remain
If the
unchanged.
planning-
That would be if it were relegated to the planning board. What I understand is that this board has gone ahead to have the commissioner, this board is going to hear the public hearing.
I'm sorry. County Attorney Theobald, so the language when they say planning department, are they referring to the county or are they referring to the state?
They're referring to the county. I read this
Okay.
as referring to the county, as the internal process of the county.
Because actually, I thought, originally, I actually thought the way that was interpreted, that the state would be holding it. But
Commissioner Rucci, has your question been answered?
That just don't make no sense.
Do you
Yeah,
have
no,
another question?
she
Okay,
answered
all
it,
right,
no,
all right. Okay, then I believe that's everything we have under new business. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Robinson. Is there a second?
Should we have the planning board here with us at that meeting then? If they're going to hear it too, should we all hear it together? Just throw it out there.
There's nothing in the law to provide for that. It does say that either the Board of Commissioners, the legislative body, or the planning board shall hold at least one public hearing.
I know, but it goes from us to them.
The Board of Commissioners can designate, as we said earlier, can designate the planning board to take the obligation to hold the hearing and
no,
then make recommendations back to the board. Or the board
So
can
they'll
hold
get
the
our
hearing
comments now. We'll
itself.
have it and they'll get our comments, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Pardon?
They'll get the comments from it, from the hearing.
If the
Planning
planning,
Commission.
if the planning commission holds the hearing, you would get their comments.
We've already
Right.
voted for the Board of Commissioners.
Yeah,
to
we
hold
already
the
voted for
hearing.
commissioners. No, they'll get our comments though now, and then they'll have a, you just said it had to go to planning commission.
No,
We can handle it after the public hearing.
right, you could certainly make them available to the planning commission, but they
No, but
have
didn't a
no...
minute ago, I said, what happens after that? You said it goes to the planning commission.
No, it doesn't.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question.
I must have misunderstood your question.
Okay, all right.
I think you were speaking of it if it had gone to the Planning Commission. Once we have the
Exactly.
public hearing, we have the opportunity to hear from our citizens.
All right, no, I
Then,
understood all that. I thought that after we have our hearing, what happens? They said it goes back to the planning commission. That's the part I didn't understand.
but I think, unless I've forgotten what I read, Ms. Theobald, County Attorney Theobald, after the public hearing, the commissioners then, after listening to our citizens, we then can continue on with the same map that currently exists. There's nothing about the public hearing process that says that this body has to change this map. The law simply requires that we have the hearing.
That's
And
correct.
so after the public hearing, we may hear things from the public that make us say, we don't want this map to go forward, and that we accept the comments made by Secretary Hall, and we're going to comply with those comments. Or we could simply allow that map to stand. And so that's, I think, the piece that you were looking
Thank you for clarifying that.
And I would like to
Commissioner
add
Robinson?
one other thing before we get a second on my motion to adjourn. Can we make a request that Secretary Hall appear at the public hearing so that we can't have to guess what's in his head? And if anybody has any questions of him, he's here.
I don't need his opinion.
Or Maryland
are we gonna
Department of
vote on
Planning
it?
staff.
We're going to vote.
Well, right now, we have a motion with no second to adjourn, so
All right, I withdraw my request, reiterating my motion to adjourn.
Mr. Secretary Hall and his staff are
They'll either
welcome to
be here or
come
they won't.
anytime. We don't
Right.
need to
Okay.
make a
But
special
I just
request.
asked if he represents one distinct side. So if he is going to be allowed to speak, I would ask my colleagues that we at least have on the other side, which is the council that we've been consulting the entire time.
Well, that's opening a can of worms. But
Yeah,
you're-
that
but-
sure
But
is.
you're welcome to have him speak.
Absolutely. I mean,
Well, I just want to be
All
clear that he
sides
is
should be
not
presented.
speaking for this board. If he wants to come in,
well, neither should Secretary Hall be speaking for this board.
Secretary Hall is the secretary of a state agency. Warren Rich is being paid for by this board.
We run the county, Candace. That has been my entire problem with this entire process. Secretary Hall has single-handedly
Commissioner
usurped the
Davis,
whole
if I might.
planning commission
Just let her
process.
finish. Excuse me, let Commissioner Davis finish. Go ahead.
I'm finished.
Well, I'm just going to say, it's a public hearing. Anybody who wishes to
Right.
speak can
As long as
speak.
they're civil.
So, I mean, if
Okay.
you want somebody to speak, just have them sign up.
I just don't want to pay for him to speak. Is there a motion to adjourn? We have a
I've
motion.
made that motion.
Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Collins. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries. And folks, we will see you next Tuesday,
He's not
same
gonna come
place.
for free, of course.
Thank you.
So we will